I found the receipt on a Tuesday. It was sitting on the kitchen counter. Just sitting there. He hadn't even tried to hide it. Tuition payment. Year 2. Law school. $54,000. I checked my account that same afternoon. $54,000. Gone. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't call him. I just stood there, reading that receipt over and over. The name on it was his. The money that paid for it was mine. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My brother Marcus and I had shared a house since our mother died. That was 3 years before the receipt. She left us a joint estate, not huge, but solid. A savings account, the house, some investments. She had one instruction, written in a handwritten note attached to her will. Take care of each other. I was 31. He was 26. I was working, paying the mortgage, managing the accounts. He was supposed to be figuring out his direction. That was the agreement. Not spoken out loud, but understood. Also I thought. After I found the receipt, I didn't say anything. I put it back exactly where it was. That night at dinner, Marcus was normal. Relaxed. He talked about a case study from school. Something about contract law. He laughed at his own joke. He ate 2 helpings. I watched his face the entire time. Nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. Just Marcus, being Marcus. Comfortable. At home. In the house our mother left us. Eating food I bought. Studying law with money I never agreed to give him. I started going back through the account statements that week. Not quickly. Slowly. Carefully. It wasn't just the $54,000. There were transfers going back 14 months. Small ones at first, $800 here, $1,200 there. Then they got bigger. A payment to a textbook supplier. A laptop. Rent on a studio apartment near the university that I didn't know he had. He was living in 2 places. Our house and a separate apartment. Both funded from the estate account. Both without my knowledge. I added it up twice to make sure. Just over $91,000. Total. I sat with that number for a while. Then I thought about what he was studying. Law. He was a second-year law student. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what unauthorized transfers meant. He knew what joint estate management required. He had been sitting in lectures about fiduciary duty while draining a shared account that was partially mine. That wasn't impulsive. That was deliberate. I thought about confronting him. I ran through the conversation in my head. He would apologize. He would explain. He would cry, maybe, or get defensive. He would say he planned to pay it back. He would say our mother would have wanted this. He would make it about her. And I would feel guilty. And nothing would change. I thought about calling a family friend, someone who knew us both. But Marcus was charming. He always had been. He would have that conversation turned around inside of 10 minutes. I thought about going to the bank. But what would I say? That my brother used our shared account. They would point me toward civil court. That would take months. And Marcus would know I was coming. None of those options gave me anything real. So I closed the statements. I put my phone down. I went to bed at the normal time. And I made a decision. Not to explode. Not to accuse. Not to give him a single reason to prepare. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The next morning I woke up early. Before Marcus. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table like it was any other day. It wasn't. I had already decided the night before what I needed. Not assumptions. Not suspicions. Not my word against his. I needed a paper trail so clean and so complete that no one could argue with it. I started with the bank. I went in person, without Marcus, and requested a full transaction history on the joint estate account going back to the month our mother died. I told the branch manager I was reviewing the estate for tax purposes. That was true enough. She printed everything without question. I sat in my car in the parking lot and read through 37 months of statements. I used a yellow highlighter for transfers I hadn't authorized. By page 4, the highlighter was running out. The pattern was methodical. He had never taken more than 15,000 in a single month. Always just under a threshold that might trigger a flag. Some months were smaller, 3,000, 5,000, as if he was testing what I noticed. And for 14 months, I hadn't noticed enough. I was working. I was trusting. I was busy being the responsible one. He had counted on that. I went home, said nothing, and made dinner. 2 days later, I drove to the law school. I didn't go inside. I just needed to confirm enrollment. I had found a tuition invoice in the account records, the school's name, the student ID number. I called the registrar's office from my car, gave Marcus's student ID, and asked to confirm the account balance was current. The woman on the phone said yes. Paid in full through the end of the academic year. I thanked her and hung up. That confirmation mattered. Because Marcus had told me, twice, in passing, that he was doing an online certification course. Something vague. Something professional. He had never once mentioned law school. Not the applications, not the acceptance, not a single day of 2 full years of enrollment. He had constructed an entirely parallel life, and walked through our front door every evening like none of it existed. The document that broke it open completely wasn't from the bank. It was an email. Marcus used a laptop that synced to a shared family cloud storage account, something our mother had set up years ago for photos and documents. He had never removed himself from it. I don't think he remembered it existed. I opened it one evening after he went to his apartment. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I found a folder labeled Admin. Inside were screenshots of the joint account login page, of my password, which he had photographed on a sticky note I kept inside a kitchen drawer, a drawer I used every day without thinking, of a spreadsheet he had built himself, tracking every transfer, every amount, the running total, and a column he labeled remaining. He had calculated what was left in the estate account. He had a plan for how much more he intended to take. The remaining column showed he had budgeted for 1 more year of tuition, plus living expenses, plus something listed only as post-grad buffer. He wasn't done. I sat there reading his spreadsheet for a long time. The room was quiet. Marcus was across town, in an apartment I was paying for, probably studying case law. I didn't feel rage. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something colder. A kind of settling. Like a decision locking into place. I copied everything. The spreadsheet. The screenshots. The email thread where he had forwarded himself a scan of my handwritten password note with the subject line, just in case. I saved it in 3 places that weren't the shared cloud. Then I closed the laptop, put it back exactly as I found it, and went to bed. Confronting him would have ruined everything. The next morning I called in late to work. I had one thing to do first. I drove to an estate attorney's office across town. Not someone who knew our family. Not someone Marcus might have encountered through school. A stranger. I had found her through a bar association directory the night before, cross-checked her reviews, and confirmed she had no connection to our county's legal community. I brought everything. Printed bank statements. The highlighted transfers. Screenshots of the spreadsheet Marcus had built. The email with my password photograph. The tuition confirmation from the registrar. A timeline I had written by hand, 1 page, chronological, no emotion. Just dates and amounts. I laid it on her desk and let her read. She read without speaking for about 4 minutes. Then she looked up and asked one question. Is he still taking money from the account? I said yes. Based on his spreadsheet, the next transfer was likely within the month. She nodded slowly. Then she told me what we were going to do. The first step was separating the accounts. She drafted an emergency petition to freeze the joint estate account pending a formal dispute review. The grounds were straightforward: unauthorized withdrawals from a jointly held estate, documented over 14 months, totaling more than $90,000. The bank was notified through proper legal channels within 48 hours. Marcus didn't know. He still came home for dinner. Still talked about school. Still used the same relaxed tone he had always used. One evening he mentioned, almost casually, that he was thinking about family law as a specialty. He smiled when he said it. I said that sounded interesting. I passed him the bread. The second step was the estate itself. Our mother's will had a clause I hadn't paid much attention to when it was first read. Most people don't read their parents' wills carefully. You're grieving. You trust the process. You assume things are straightforward. They were not straightforward. The attorney found it on her second reading of the document. A standard disinheritance clause, common in estates of that era. It stated plainly that any beneficiary, who was found to have acted against the financial interest of the estate, or to have misappropriated shared assets, would forfeit their claim to the remainder. Our mother had included it almost as a formality. It was not a formality anymore. That clause, combined with the documented withdrawals, meant Marcus hadn't just exposed himself to a repayment claim. He had potentially disqualified himself from the estate entirely. The house. The remaining investments. Everything still held in trust. My attorney filed the documentation with the probate court quietly. No drama. Just paperwork. The kind of paperwork that sits in a clerk's office and waits. The third step was the law school. I contacted the Dean of Students' office and submitted a formal notification. I explained that tuition payments made on behalf of a current student had been funded through unauthorized withdrawals from a joint estate account, and that the matter was now subject to legal proceedings. I included documentation. I was not asking them to expel Marcus. I was creating a record. An institutional record that existed independently of anything I said or claimed. If this ever went further, and I believed it would, I needed the school to have received formal notice before any court date. That timing mattered. The dean's office confirmed receipt in writing. I saved that confirmation with everything else. By the end of that week, I had 4 separate backups of every document. One with my attorney. One in a safety deposit box at a different bank. One with a trusted friend, who had no involvement and asked no questions. One encrypted on a device Marcus had never seen. I had also quietly contacted a forensic accountant my attorney recommended. He reviewed the transaction history and produced a professional report confirming the pattern of withdrawals, the methodology Marcus had used to stay under reportable thresholds, and the total sum. $91,460. That number was now official. Documented. Signed. Marcus came home that Friday evening carrying law school textbooks. He dropped them on the couch, stretched, and said it had been a long week. I asked if he wanted coffee. He said yes. I made it. He had no idea that a probate court had his name on a filing. He had no idea the estate account was frozen. He had no idea his school had a letter in their records. He had no idea that every move he had made over 14 months had been quietly, carefully, completely accounted for. He sat on the couch in our mother's house, drinking coffee I made him, completely at ease. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The court date was set for a Thursday morning. I didn't tell Marcus. My attorney had advised against it. There was no legal obligation to notify him personally in advance. The filing had been served to his registered address, which was the apartment near the law school. The apartment he had never told me about. The one I was technically still funding through the estate. He had listed that address on his law school enrollment forms. I know because the process server confirmed delivery. He signed for it himself. I woke up early that Thursday. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table for a while. The house was quiet. Marcus had stayed at his apartment the night before, which he did sometimes. I didn't know if he had opened the envelope. I didn't know what he was thinking. I had stopped trying to predict him weeks ago. I drove to the courthouse alone. My attorney met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She was calm. She had a leather folder with everything organized in order. She asked me once how I was doing. I said fine. That was true. We went in and sat down. Marcus arrived 11 minutes late. He walked in wearing a suit I hadn't seen before. Navy blue. Well fitted. He looked like what he was studying to become. He had a folder under his arm and an expression I recognized, composed, slightly detached, the face he put on when he needed to manage a situation. He saw me and stopped walking for just a moment. Then he kept moving and sat at the opposite table. He had brought himself. No attorney. I learned later, he had contacted 2 separate lawyers in the weeks after receiving the filing. Both had declined to represent him after reviewing the documentation. The judge was a woman in her early 60s. Unhurried. She reviewed the submission for several minutes before she spoke. She confirmed the filing. Confirmed the documented withdrawals. Confirmed the forensic accountant's report. Confirmed the disinheritance clause in the original will. Then she looked up and asked Marcus a question in the same tone she might use to ask about the weather. Were you aware, at the time of these transfers, that the joint estate account required co-authorization for withdrawals exceeding $1,000? Marcus said he believed the funds were available to both parties equally. The judge looked at him for a moment. Then she asked the second question. Were you aware that your mother's will contained a disinheritance clause applicable in the event of financial misappropriation by a named beneficiary? The room was very quiet. Marcus said he had not read that portion of the will carefully. The judge nodded once. Slowly. She said, then let me make sure you understand it now. She read the clause aloud. All of it. In full. In a courtroom with a clerk, a bailiff, my attorney, and Marcus sitting at a table with no one beside him. She didn't editorialize. She didn't raise her voice. She read it the way you read something that doesn't require additional comment. Then she reviewed the total sum documented by the forensic accountant. $91,460. She noted that the withdrawals had been structured deliberately to avoid threshold flags. She noted the spreadsheet Marcus had created tracking remaining estate funds. She noted the email containing my photographed password. She called that last item particularly relevant to intent. The ruling was measured and complete. Full repayment of the documented sum, with interest, to be structured through a court-supervised payment plan. A formal finding of financial misconduct entered into the probate record. The disinheritance clause activated. Marcus's claim to the remaining estate, including the house and the investment accounts, was forfeit. His law school was notified of the court's finding by the clerk's office as a matter of record. Not by me. By the court. Whatever happened next with his enrollment was between him and the institution. I didn't ask about it. I didn't follow up. That wasn't my concern. Marcus didn't speak to me after the ruling. He stood up, picked up his folder, and walked out. I watched him go. He didn't look back. I sat for a moment after the room began to clear. My attorney put a hand briefly on the table near mine, not quite a gesture, just a presence, and said we were in a good position going forward. I thanked her. She gathered her papers and left. I sat alone in the courtroom for another minute or two. I thought about my mother. About the note she had left with the will. Take care of each other. I had tried to do that. I had paid the mortgage. I had managed the accounts. I had made dinner and passed the bread and made the coffee. I had also, when it became necessary, made sure that what she built didn't disappear quietly into someone else's ambition. I think she would have understood that. I drove home slowly. The house looked the same as it always did. Same front door. Same driveway. Same kitchen, where I had found a receipt on a Tuesday, and stood very still and understood that something was wrong. I made dinner. Something simple. I ate at the table. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. I just sat with the quiet for a while, and let it be quiet. That night, everything was quiet.